Welcome to One Last Take, a podcast about seeing film from every angle. I'm Wes Skinner, and today's episode will be a little different than usual, since the only wide release worth a damn last weekend was Illumination's Minions and Monsters. Yeah, I can't believe I just said that either. Anyways, after we unpack that, I'll be sharing my top 10 favorites of the year so far, so I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the show where I share my thoughts on the new releases of the past weekend. And as I alluded to up top, this was a strange one to say the least. Given the slow nature of the week, I figured this would be a great time to check in with my favorites of the year so far. But first, let's talk about this past weekend. The only two releases that hit near me this week were Minions and Monsters and Young Washington, both of which I have to admit I was not looking forward to. I've always been severely allergic to the Minions' spastic energy, and it seemed like it was only aimed to cater to Gen Z attention spans. And as for Angel Studios' Christian-leaning historical outings, the less said about the audience those movies draw to the theater I work at, the better. Over 35 years of watching and loving movies, I've managed to remain fairly open-minded while slowly developing a sense for which films I simply know I'm not going to enjoy. So I chose to pass on the obvious patriotic choice for the 4th of July weekend and save myself the 2 hours and change of what I know will at some point turn into religious propaganda. If that's your thing or something that won't bother you, I promise not to judge and would actually recommend you go see Young Washington. I hear the action set pieces and production design are pretty solid, it's just not for me. However, despite my prior disdain for everyone's favorite little yellow guys, early word of Minions and Monsters started to catch my eye. I read some snippets here and there, something about an ode to early Hollywood, something about it appealing to adult fans, especially those who love film, and one review even called it a great children's movie about movies. It was starting to feel like I was being lured into a trap, like someone somewhere bet the powers that be at Illumination that they couldn't trick me into seeing one of these things, and then some cinephile at a writer's desk just cracked his knuckles and went to town. I haven't read into what it is that prompted this approach, if this connection to the physical comedy of the silent film era was actually in the DNA of Minions the whole time, or if this was just some much-needed polishing of a formula that, after many movies in, was at risk of growing stale. Either way, I stand before you saying that I walked away not only liking, but dare I say loving a Minions movie. Not only was I shocked by my own enjoyment, but it's how quickly I was drawn in that truly surprised me. The movie begins in a museum as a perfectly cast Allison Janney walks a tour through the history of cinema. And after passing odes to Spielberg and George Lucas himself trapped in a glass case, Janney introduces the kids to a statue of what she says are the two most influential figures in Hollywood, a pair of minions named James and Henry. From there, we're taken back to the beginning, with the minions living up to their name, wandering ancient Greece looking for a big boss, a villain for whom they can help carry out evil deeds. When outcast James fumbles their opportunity with a fearsome Cyclops, they are forced to continue their search. This goes on and on through time until the tiny immortals make it to 1920s Hollywood. It's here where the movie lets its cinema-loving freak flag fly, when the minions find an actor dressed as a dastardly train robber and chase after him, assuming he'll make an ideal big boss. This results in a visual and referential goldmine of a set piece that sees the minions indirectly recreating classic silent film moments, including the house falling on Buster Keaton and Steamboat Bill Jr., Charlie Chaplin's factory fumbles in modern times, and Harold Lloyd dangling from the hand of a clock tower. It's not just the hey, I know that reference nature of these gags that make them so delightful, though. It's that they're actually woven into a genuinely well-constructed set piece that's funny and enjoyable entirely on its own, with its own physical gags and the minions kind of doing their thing, in addition to what makes this iconography special in the first place. Therefore, the cinephile love letter woven into it only enhances the scene. It's the way Easter eggs should be used, to elevate the art to something special, and this does that while feeling like its own unique set piece. After this sequence, the minions are catapulted into Hollywood stardom, only to be thwarted by the arrival of talkies, where they are unable to recite any lines of dialogue due to only speaking minionese. It's an obvious reference to Singin' in the Rain, but it also makes a bit of a PG version of Damien Chazelle's Babylon, which, if you've seen that movie, is pretty hilarious and weird to think about. But it's also a clever way of tying real-world Hollywood history into this goofy children's movie. So anyways, when the minions are left astray, once again searching for a big boss, James is convinced his purpose lies back in Hollywood, and he decides to come up with a movie of his own. But in order to make a monster blockbuster worthy of greatness on a low budget with minimal resources, he's left with one option: find an actual monster. It's at this point we meet Goomy, a tiny Cthulhu-like creature voiced by South Park's Trey Parker, who claims to want to help James with his movie, while secretly withholding nefarious plans of his own. Meanwhile, the rest of the minions find their new big boss in a robot named Dort. Now, I know that all sounds like a lot, but the movie somehow makes the separate plots and various twists and turns work with surprisingly good writing and clever vignette-like structure. The connecting thread of cinematic homage never goes away, as the film begins in silent Hollywood, behind the scenes, and ends with a climactic set piece pulled straight out of a mid-century sci-fi movie. Charming vocal performances from Jesse Eisenberg, Jeff Bridges, and Christoph Waltz provide excellent interplay and balance to the babbling insanity of the minions themselves, which is actually downplayed in key moments to keep the film from being an over-caffeinated sensory assault. The minions, James, Henry, and Ed, and the hilariously named supervisor of the group, Dick, all have distinct personalities and surprisingly clear motivations despite the language barrier, even though their dialogue feels calibrated to trick the audience into thinking that they know what the minions are saying, as they mix French, Spanish, Italian, and random phrases like miso soup into their dialect. The good news is that this movie is a joy to watch unfold, and the rare children's movie these days that feels inspired and packed with creativity, that's willing to give in to the kooky nature of its characters without talking down to the kids who love it, and the adults who are forced to watch it actually have something special to look forward to. The second half doesn't quite sustain the wild creativity of the first, but it moves quickly and remains charming throughout to make this what is quite possibly my favorite animated movie of the year so far. The bad news, it's kind of bombing. At least in the States, and it's hard to say why it's performing so poorly, whether it's the holiday weekend premiere, the fact that Toy Story was only a couple weeks ago, or a combination of the two. But it does seem like the Minions hype is dying down right as it changed course into something slightly more mature, which is honestly a shame to see. Still, I'd urge anyone with even the slightest curiosity about the movie or any sort of love for film to see it. I don't want to overstate this is not a masterpiece by any means, but the way it uses tentpoles in Hollywood history would actually make it a great introduction to film for younger audiences. I'm hoping word of mouth is enough to give this one some momentum in the coming weeks. Regardless, and much to my surprise, I'm already thinking about seeing it a second time myself. Now, since that's all I found worth seeing in the past week in theaters, and I didn't get around to much else, we're going to skip right to the good stuff. It's time to talk about my favorites of the year so far. I originally wasn't going to do this, but given there's been so much to talk about in just the first 6 months of the year, I'm afraid some of it will get lost in the shuffle by the time we reach December. So before the wave of late summer movies and Oscar season outings dominate the conversation, these are my top 10 favorite movies of the year so far. Now we're going to start at 10 and work our way up, kicking things off with the surprise horror event of the year, Obsession. I don't know what it is, but something in the alchemy of this movie got everyone to pay attention. And horror has always kind of been a huge thing at the box office. It's not really a surprise that this movie is doing well, but the fact that it's still in theaters and people are still having such a positive visceral reaction to it long after its release is akin to something only like Sinners from last year, which was made for about 100 times the budget. Now Sinners is much more up my alley, but I can't argue with the filmmaking here. And of course, that lead performance just carries this thing in a way that feels like we're getting a sneak peek into a future star. If you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend it. It's not for the faint of heart with certain sequences especially, but it is a blast for something so dark and weird. And even if I'm not quite as high on it as some people, I'm just really happy people are seeing it. Now at number 9, we have another movie with a very long run at the box office, and that was Project Hail Mary. Flat out, this movie is just awesome, and it's the kind of thing you want to see on a big screen. It's a crowd pleaser through and through, with Ryan Gosling being charming as hell as always, Lord and Miller proving that they're just great at that sort of like sippy comedy and never forgetting to have a heart at the core of it. You get to see all of that blown up on this huge scale, and it's just really special. It plays it a little safe in certain moments and absolutely goes on too long for me to consider it a masterpiece per se. But as far as everything it does well, I think it does it nearly perfectly, and I'm definitely excited to rewatch it and see if my feelings change at all. And at number 8, we have Backrooms, which between this and Obsession, Backrooms is my favorite of the two. I like the psychological, weird, atmospheric energy of it, and I like that you kind of just don't feel safe the whole time. That helps having these extended sort of first-person 90s camera sequences and these long takes, walking through these rooms and seeing what's around the corner, or simply dreading it. The performances with Renata Reinsva and Chiwetel Ejiofor are both fantastic, and the fact that Kane Parsons being 20 years old directing this, it can't be overstated how special this is. is. And not just in how talented he is, but between this and obsession with these YouTube creators just dominating the box office is so cool to see. I'm really happy this movie is succeeding. I'm really happy that for the most part people are loving it. And it's the kind of horror that even if this was some tiny release not attached to any sort of IP or anything popular at all, if I had found it hidden somewhere on streaming, I would love it just as much. So I can't even fathom what Kane Parsons will be capable of after he hones his skills a little more as a filmmaker. But even if he never does another film again, this is an incredible footprint to leave on the industry. And again, I just can't overstate how unprecedented and awesome this movie is. Next up at number 7 we have which was probably my first number 1 of the year and has slowly dropped after sort of thinking about certain movies more and weighing how much all of them stuck with me, but it's still very strongly in my top 10, and that's The Drama. Pattinson and Zendaya are both fantastic. This movie gets into some dark, uncomfortable territory, and they're along for the ride. If neither of these performances are as committed as these two are, then the movie just falls apart and does not work. And even the supporting cast, especially Alana Haim, just going for the throat and not being afraid to sort of dig into this dark material. And then ultimately using it as a vessel for just almost a very stubborn, weird romantic comedy is fascinating to me. And it just really feels like nothing I've ever seen before. So yeah, even though it's not my number 1 still, I won't be forgetting about this one anytime soon. Then at number 6, we've got 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. I was really taken aback by how small this one was compared to the last movie, and the more I sit with it, the more I realize that's a strength rather than a bug. This movie is gory and nasty, and Jack O'Connell is a captivating villain, maybe one of my favorites in recent years. And you cannot say enough about Ralph Fiennes in this movie. He and Jack O'Connell are more of the main characters rather than Spike. And I think that's sort of crucial for Spike to see what the two different sides of his future in a world like this could be. You either give in and embrace it, become a demon in this hell on Earth, or you hold on to the remnants of what's left on Earth and try to keep that humanity no matter what. The best sort of post-apocalyptic stories all focus on endurance, the endurance of the human spirit specifically. And even though we've seen these sorts of stories done over and over and over again, I think there's something special about focusing it through the lens of a coming-of-age story. And the movie continues to do that here, picking up right where the last one left off. And even though in some ways it does feel like a huge diversion, I think it stays true to where we left all the characters last time and really moves things forward in an interesting and very character-focused way. Also, that Iron Maiden sequence is an all-timer, and I think the third 28 Years Later movie is now one of my most anticipated movies of the next couple years. At number 5, we maybe have one of the most divisive films on this list, and that's Mother Mary. This movie is not going to be for everyone. It's artsy, it's weird, it's overtly earnest in a way that I think would make a lot of viewers uncomfortable. David Lowery has always been a special artist in my mind. I love a ghost story, and this really kind of builds on that and feels like a bit of a spiritual successor. But Anne Hathaway and Michaela Cole just give these really special performances and the type of movie I like, which is this chamber piece that's just character focused and feels like almost a duel between characters as you're watching them trade glances and cutting lines of dialogue. It's all just very Shakespearean, but also grounded at the same time. It's not exactly perfect, but I just find something about the vision so undeniable. And I can't say that a movie this year or any recent years has made me feel exactly like the way this movie made me feel, which is sort of a common thread as you'll see throughout all of these movies. And next up at number 4, we have Is God Is, directed by Alicia Harris, based on her own stage play, and you can tell that there's just been so much thought put into not only the line deliveries and the structure and the setup, but also how, if she was ever going to bring this to film, how she would do that and how that would be executed. You can tell that was an idea very early on in her head, at least I can only assume, because this is such a clear vision of adaptation, and not in a way that feels like this completely different piece of art, but it just feels like where this sort of belongs. It's still very stage play-like in some ways, but it's also kind of epic and grand and has this sort of spiritual and physical road movie aspect that makes it feel like some sort of Greek fable. Carrie Young and Mallory Johnson are fantastic as the sisters who are seeking revenge, and Carrie Young especially. I had no idea who she was before this movie, but she's just magnetic and gives one of the most powerful performances of the year. And Johnson has a really beautiful, understated aspect to her character that she plays into perfectly, and not in a way that makes her feel like the quiet, shy sister archetype. She really feels unique. I don't know how to describe it. There are touches here that just make these characters feel like they exist outside of the movie, and I think that's always a great sign that a movie has done its job in developing its characters. And of course you have Sterling K. Brown, who feels like this physical embodiment of the devil. As I said in my review of it for the podcast, I really think that this is the perfect example of taking that Tarantino-esque style and evolving it into something unique to that director and creator. I think that this is such a cool vision, and the more I think about it, the more I love it and want to go back and watch it over and over again. And that's the most I can ever really ask from a movie. And at number 3, we have a fairly recent movie that has already dug its way into my head, and that's The Death of Robin Hood. I really can't express enough how generic this movie could have been in other hands. But Pig director Michael Sarnowski does such a great job of throwing you into this muddy, nasty, gritty world, beating you over the head with violence, and then after about a half hour to 40 minutes into the movie, he just rips you out of it, and there's this sobering contemplation for the last hour of the film that is just fascinating. I think it's based on a book, and I'd be curious to see if that feels the way this is structured, because that tonal whiplash is so effective, allowing you to still feel this tension and almost paranoia about all the violence that you just witnessed. You're just constantly expecting something bad to happen around every corner, and when you realize that the rest of the movie is just devoted to sort of a person looking at the fallout of all the destruction and chaos and violence that they've caused, I've just never really seen anything like it, and especially not through the perspective of some sort of folk hero like Robin Hood. A lot of people are going to throw this on and expect some swashbuckling good times, and that's not what this movie is, and I think it makes that pretty clear. So if you're going in expecting that, I'm sorry, but I think what this movie delivers is something more special and unique than that. If you're in a patient mood and you want to feel some feelings, I highly recommend giving this movie a shot. And at number 2, on about as far at the opposite end of the spectrum as humanly possible, we have I Love Boosters. I adore this movie, and if not for the number 1, this would probably be it. But Boots Riley just lived up to the expectations, piggybacking off of all of the ideas and visuals of Sorry to Bother You, and really just dialed it up to 11 here. I Love Boosters is stylish and unapologetic and loud and colorful and funny and just so idiosyncratic in a way that is incredibly refreshing. It feels like just getting ice water dumped on you at the end of this movie, because you don't see things like this anymore. You simply don't. I can't overstate it enough. I mean, this movie has claymation, miniatures, and all in ways that you kind of just stop questioning after a while. It just feels so germane to the world that this movie has created. And the performances are all so dialed in that they feel like they belong here. And then at the end of it, for all of it to actually make you feel something is just really impressive. Now, I can see people getting lost in all of the craziness and just kind of thinking this movie is a lot of style and ideas getting thrown at the wall, but maybe ultimately not coming together. But for me, the more I think about it, the more I watch it, I just think it, kind of unlike Sorry to Bother You, really does all come together in a way that's just so satisfying and oddly hopeful for a movie that is so critical of modern day capitalism and the almost oppressive nature of how everybody and everything wants something from you. Watching this movie is just like having someone sit down next to you and be like, hey, it's okay, the world is fucked up and crazy and we're just gonna have fun with it. And that's really what I think a good satirical film should do. And at number 1, my absolute favorite of the year so far is a movie that I had expectations in the sky for, and it delivered results that were somehow way above that. And I'm talking about The Furious. Yes, there are things like character development, dialogue, the weird dubbing that would bother me, but this is an action movie. And if I were to say that this is any less than a perfect action movie, I would be lying to you. This movie knows its strengths, it knows its weaknesses, and it leans into those strengths so hard that anything else is so easy to forget about. This movie is about the physical prowess of these actors. It's about the action. It's about the set pieces. It's about the choreography. and it is all top notch, and it's filmed in ways that are impressive and leaves it on these breathtaking long shots that just really makes you feel like you're watching a hyper-violent Cirque du Soleil. There's not much else I can say about this movie that I didn't already in my recent review, so go back and listen to that for details. But just if you want action and your idea of it to be reinvented, please go see this movie. Not enough people saw it in theaters. I'm lucky that I even got a chance to see it, but I promise you that everyone who has seen it has not been disappointed and knows exactly what I'm talking about. This is action at its finest. This is what action cinema should be. And I don't think I'm overstating it when I say that this is sort of an evolution, sort of a next step into action cinema. Because there's nothing like watching this movie, and it just makes me wish we got hundreds more like this, but I know we won't. But I'm just going to appreciate the fact that Kenji Tanigaki and all of the cast and the stunt crew gave us this thing. And even if we never get another one like it, I'm happy to just watch it on repeat for 100 years. It's totally fine. But that is my top 10 of the year so far. It's honestly been kind of a game changer in some of my favorite genres, especially horror and action. And we've still got another 6 months to go somehow. I honestly can't even believe it. Next week, we'll be back on track with some new releases, including Evil Dead Burn, Moana, and The Invite. Until then, you can check out more movie thoughts at one_last_take on Letterboxd. And if you feel like it, subscribe to the podcast, because why not? As always, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.